Good evening, everyone, or morning or afternoon, whatever it is, whatever time it is when you happen to be watching this. I'm recording it live and about to be on playback, obviously. It's right now 11:46 p.m. on this, what is left of Sunday, the 3rd of December, 2023. And Candy, the Wonder Pup, always is at the beginning of my videos, or almost always, begging for her treat. You want pawing at me, so give me a paw, lay down, speak, and that placates her and gives me peace. I'm going to try and keep this one short, although I'm not very good at that because I'm a loquacious old son of a gun with my beard growing out and my hair growing out, what's left of it. Anyway, as always, thank you for the likes, for the subscriptions to this miserable, pathetic YouTube channel. This old Canadian guy, 57, throwing his opinions, views, and thoughts out to the world. I enjoy it. Anyway, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's the popular slogan being bandied about right now. It's a slogan that actually originates with Hamas. And I view it as something of a branding statement, an advertising slogan, propaganda, call it whatever you want, but it's effective. And its effectiveness can be gauged by how much traction it gains in discourse and in postings online and such. And I think pretty much anyone who's paying attention to the news and to any degree has now heard it, and many are repeating it. And so I think it's a worthwhile question to ask. If this were to come to fruition, if Palestine was to be free from the river to the sea, and the principal river is the Jordan, and the sea is the Mediterranean, so we're basically talking about wiping Israel off the map, which is also Hamas's stated goal, to eliminate the nation state of Israel and to replace it with a Palestinian Islamic state. So no longer a Jewish nation state, instead an Islamic nation state. And I think it's worthwhile. What would a free Palestine look like? I understand the power of that message, because the narrative is that the Palestinian people are oppressed, that they're living under an apartheid type system. And so obviously they are oppressed, and oppression is bad and freedom is good. I think we'll all agree with that better to be free than to be oppressed. So what would an Islamic Palestinian state look like? And I think probably the best way to look at it is to consider that Hamas in the Gaza Strip, as well as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Yemen's Houthis, these all three groups, who all have the stated objective of eliminating the nation state of Israel, wiping it off the map and replacing it with a new country, with a new nation state called Palestine. That's their ultimate goal. Get Israel gone, no more Jewish nation state, now we have Palestine. Well, all three of those groups that have that as their stated objective, all three are sponsored by Iran. And I think if you want to get a gauge as to what a Palestinian state would be like, what freedom would be like in a nation state of Palestine, I think a good thing to do would be to look at Iran. And I can invite you to do that yourself. Look at women's rights in Iran, where women are not allowed to go out in public alone. They have to be escorted by male members of their family, and they have to have their faces covered. What I find interesting is the LGBTQ, etc. community. There are rallies going on now where the LGBTQ community, and the rest of the letters in that acronym, however many they are, I don't think it ends. I think it's ending now with a plus symbol. It goes on forever. But they're waving banners saying the LGBTQ community supports a free Palestine, which I find incredibly ironic, because look at Iran and look at Islamic attitudes in general, to forget the rest of the acronym. How do they regard homosexuality? How does Hamas regard homosexuality? There are reports that homosexuals in Gaza have been thrown off of buildings. I forget the word. There's a word in Arabic for what homosexuality represents. In the Bible, if you read the King James Version, it's called an abomination. And I think that's roughly the Arabic word. It's an abomination. I don't know of any Christians or Jews who advocate execution for homosexuals. I want to make one point perfectly clear. I do not regard Israel to be perfect. Far from it. However, I don't regard the United States of America to be perfect, or Canada, or Britain, or France, or the Netherlands, or Belgium, or Australia, or Japan, or any country. Every single nation state is flawed. With respect to this notion of apartheid, I find it ironic when Canadians bring this up and say, oh, it's an apartheid state. Apartheid was a system that the name apartheid comes, I think it's an Afrikaner word. It comes from South Africa. It's how they dealt with the Black population, the African population within South Africa. However, interesting little historical note for Canadians: when South Africa was establishing this apartheid system, they came to my native Canada and they studied our residential, or not residential, but rather reserve system for our native Indigenous population, for Canada's First Nations. They modeled they called it apartheid, but it was modeled after the way Canada dealt with our First Nations peoples. So talk about don't throw stones when you live in a glass house. Canadians complaining that Israel has an apartheid system. Well, the South Africans, in establishing their apartheid system, modeled it after Canada. A large reason why Israel is accused of being an apartheid state is because of the residents who live in the occupied territories, which are Gaza and the West Bank. If they want to leave those territories, if they want to leave Gaza, if they want to leave the West Bank, then they have to jump through all kinds of hurdles. There are often security fences or even concrete walls, checks. And from what I understand, it can be quite laborious to get through all these, to go, if you want to go visit family, a doctor's appointment, whatever, that these hurdles make it more than problematic. And I certainly empathize, but the question must be asked, well, why does Israel have these border fences and concrete walls, and why do they have these security checkpoints and such? And I would invite you to look up all the history of the intifadas, the uprisings that have taken place, where individuals have traveled from the occupied territories, again, Gaza and the West Bank, and have engaged in terrorist acts, suicide bombings, and such. How is Israel to respect the human rights of the Palestinian people while at the same time protecting their citizens from acts of terrorism? And it should be noted that when I say Israeli citizens include individuals who are Arab Palestinian. The nation state of Israel has a population of 9 point or right up and around, I'm going to say 10 million people, and I'm close. And of those 10 million, roughly 2 million, and these are citizens are of Arab Palestinian background, not Jewish ethnically or religiously. They're either Arab Muslims or Arab something else. If you've watched my previous video, I have a bit of an issue with the term Palestinian, simply because it's a name referencing a specific area that goes back almost 2,000 years, around 135 or so, somewhere around in the early 2nd century. Rome, that's the name Rome gave the land that they had formerly referred to as Judea. It had been Judea under Roman rule, and that's how they always referred to it. Then there was a second major revolt, the Bar Kokhba, or something close to that revolt. There was a revolt in and around AD 70, which led to Rome destroying the Jewish temple and enslaving Jews, sending them off to what it was then Rome, what is now Italy. And then, but the entire Jewish population wasn't enslaved. They weren't all part of the diaspora, where Jews were cast out to the four corners of the earth. Some did remain in Israel or in Judea, but then they had a second revolt sometime around 135 or thereabouts, this Bar Kokhba revolt. And Hadrian, who was the emperor at the time, then had the territory renamed, and it was called Philistia, which that's a Latin name referencing the Philistines. And that eventually got rendered into English as Palestine. And for the longest time, that was, the Romans stuck that label on it, and it stayed that way for centuries, right into the 20th century. And it's still around now. But Jewish individuals, Jews have always lived in this territory. When you get into the early 1800s and before, the number of Jews living in what is now Israel it got down very low, like 10,000 or so people, an incredibly small population. But there have always been Jews who lived there, and they would refer to themselves back then as Palestinian Jews. And when the British took control of the territory from the Ottoman Empire, they simply stuck with the name, and they called it the British Mandate for Palestine. When they took control of the territory, actually, it wasn't just what we now consider Israel today. It actually included all of what is now called Jordan. When they took it over in 1918, they took over a territory that included present-day Israel and present-day Jordan. But what happened was in 1921, before the British Mandate for Palestine was formally recognized by the League of Nations, before that formal recognition had come into being, in 1921, Winston Churchill and the British government, they carved out a section of their mandated territory, and they created the nation state of what was then called Transjordan, because it was across the Jordan. So, and Jordan had control of the West Bank. That was Jordanian territory. The people living in that territory were Jordanians right up until 1967. They were Jordanians, had Jordanian citizenship. They would have had Jordanian passports. Then in 1967, just more history, Israel was attacked by 3 countries, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. And miraculously, they actually captured territory from all 3. From Egypt, they took the Gaza Strip, as well as the Sinai Peninsula. From Jordan, they captured the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And from the Syrians, they took the Golan Heights. They gave Egypt in 1978. Jimmy Carter had something called the Camp David Peace Accords that involved Menachem Begin, who was the Prime Minister of Israel, and Anwar Sadat, who was the then Prime Minister of Egypt. They sat down at Camp David and they signed what were called the Camp David Peace Accords, and Israel gave Egypt back the Sinai Peninsula in exchange for Egypt formally recognizing that Israel had a right to exist. And since that time, Egypt and Israel have been at peace. Interestingly, 1978, Israel also wanted to give them back Gaza. They said, you can have the Gaza Strip back too. And you can check this out from multiple sources. Go to Al Jazeera, go to Islamic sources, Arabic sources. Israel was wanted to give Egypt back the Gaza Strip, but Egypt didn't want it. Egypt said, no, you can keep that little parcel of land. The population there is too problematic. They're too extremist. We don't want to deal with them. They're your problem now. I look upon the Gaza Strip and the occupied territories as being something of a Trojan horse or an Islamic horse, because Islam, broadly speaking, has an issue with different religious faith group, the Jewish people, having this little tiny speck of land. There's a map that gets shared around, and I have an issue with it. It's not completely wrong. It's a matter of not semetics, but semantics, meaning words. The problem I have with the map is they show you, they said this is a map of the Arab world, and then they show you this is little tiny Israel. The problem I have with it is that it's not the Arab world, because it goes all the way from it includes Morocco, for example. Well, Moroccans are not Arab, they're African. Algerians are Algeria, another country on the north coast on the coast of the Mediterranean, North Africa, they're not Arabs. There might be some Arabs living there. Some Arabs may have immigrated, but the people of Morocco, the people of Algeria, and more, even Egyptians are not necessarily Arabs. They can be. It's a little closer geographically to where Arabs come from. Arabs come from what is now called Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, where you have Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Qatar, Kuwait, the Emirate States, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Jordan is also, I believe, at least not the West Bank, but other parts of Jordan. I believe those are considered part of the Arabian Peninsula, but I'm sidetracking way too far. I wanted to keep this video short. So ask yourself, what would a nation state of Palestine look like? Would it be free from a westernized view? Would we consider, if you consider Iran to be free, as I don't think most people who hold to a westernized worldview would consider Iran to be a free nation state. I should mention, I see I have a couple people watching, which I don't often get. Comments are on. If you want to put up a comment in the live chat, you're most welcome. I'm not going to go more than 5 minutes, though. I'm going to wrap this up pretty quick. The other thing I wanted you to consider is the fact that Hamas, both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, that's the group that is the political body in the West Bank. Both of these groups were each elected in 2006, and there has not been an election since. So we're coming up on 20 years. It's been 17, 18 years without any elections. The elections that they were supposed to have subsequent to those 2006 elections were canceled. How would Americans feel if Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama, Trump, if they canceled the elections and said, nah, I'm staying in power? How would Canadians feel if in 2025 Trudeau said, I like being prime minister and I'm at 21% in the polls. The election is canceled. I get to stay. That's what's happened in both Gaza and in the occupied West Bank. I mentioned it in previous videos, and I'll wrap it up with this. In Israel, there is a Palestinian sitting on their Supreme Court. There are Palestinians who are CEOs of Israeli companies. I don't know if there are any current Palestinians sitting in the Knesset. However, they have Palestinians run in elections. They are official candidates in their elections, and Palestinians have been elected to Israel's parliament called the Knesset, Knesset. I think that's the spelling. Is it perfect? Do Israelis treat the Palestinian minority, both the Palestinians who have citizenship, and those in the occupied territories who don't have citizenship, do they treat them perfectly? I'm not going to say that they do. Just as Canada does not treat our First Nations peoples perfectly, just as the Australians don't treat their Aboriginal population perfectly. But if Palestine does become free from the river to the sea and Israel is wiped off the map, what would it look like? And I think I'll end it off by going back to what I said near the beginning. I think if you want to get a decent indication of what it would look like, just take a look at the freedoms that exist in the nation state of Iran, which is a Islamic, I don't think it's unfair to call it a theocracy run by the Ayatollahs. So that's the end of my video. Gordon Causey, thank you again for watching. Thank you to the two of you. One of you is probably a bot. I usually get one bot watching. And comments are welcome. I don't mind disagreement. I'm something of a free speech absolutist. So, but I've had a couple messages put up on previous videos that are just two words: free Palestine. Well, I would invite you to comment as to what you think a quote unquote free Palestine would look like in terms of human rights, regards to rights for women, regards to rights for LGBTQ or LGBTQT or however it's rendered. So Likes and subscriptions are welcome. Appreciate the views, and we will talk to you again later. I kept it under 25 minutes.